The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of copper dust and whispering winds. For most, it was a wasteland. For Elias Morgan, it was home. His workshop squatted on the edge of the dunes, built from welded ship hulls and the bones of forgotten machines. At night, the stars blazed so bright they seemed close enough to touch, but Elias no longer looked up at them. He had work, and work was simpler than wonder. He wiped sweat from his brow, the smell of burnt metal thick in the air. The generator had failed again, third time this week. It was old Earth tech, held together with tape, faith, and a collection of scavenged parts he barely understood. His daughter Lyra sat on the worktable, swinging her legs, drawing shapes in the dust with a bent screwdriver. She was 7, sharp-eyed, and endlessly curious. She asked questions about everything: why the stars moved, why the wind howled at night, why her mother had gone up there and never come back. Elias answered when he could. When he couldn't, he just said, "Because the universe doesn't make sense, kiddo." That night, the universe decided to remind him just how little sense it made. It began with a tremor, soft at first, like distant thunder. Then the sky tore open. A streak of fire cut through the stars, a burning wound across the heavens. Lyra gasped and pointed. "Dad! A comet!" But it wasn't a comet. The object moved with intention, stuttering like something wounded, and as it plunged toward the desert, the air shivered with static. Elias could feel it in his teeth. Moments later, the ground heaved, and a sound like the sky collapsing followed. Then silence, heavy and electric. He stared toward the dunes where the light had fallen. His instinct screamed to stay inside, to keep Lyra close and forget what he'd seen. But curiosity, dangerous, human curiosity, gnawed at him. He checked his old pulse rifle, barely functional, and told Lyra to stay in the bunker. She protested, but he gave her that look. The one that ended every argument. The desert was alive with heat and the faint metallic scent of ozone. As he crested the ridge, he saw it, a colossal structure half buried in sand, its surface fractured and glowing faintly. It wasn't a meteor. It was a ship. Not human. The hull shimmered in hues he couldn't name, layers of material that bent light wrong, like it was trying to escape visibility altogether. Energy bled from open wounds along its side. He approached cautiously, drawn to the rhythmic hum pulsing beneath the sand. It was the sound of something trying to live. A hatch had torn open, revealing a corridor of fractured crystal and shadows. He stepped closer, squinting through the haze. Then he heard it, a low, broken sound. Not mechanical. A voice. Weak, almost pleading. "Help, me." The words were distorted but unmistakably alive. Elias froze. Every instinct told him to run. But instead, he climbed into the wreckage, heart pounding, breath shallow. The light shifted around him, the ship reacting as if aware of his presence. He found her near the core chamber, a figure sprawled among broken conduits, surrounded by flickering blue mist. She was massive, twice his height, even slumped against the wall. Her skin, if that's what it was, looked metallic, yet soft, iridescent under the dying ship light. Her armor was cracked, leaking streams of bioluminescent fluid that pulsed like veins. Elias approached carefully, holding his light over her face. It wasn't entirely alien, too symmetrical, too expressive. Her eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly with color that shifted between violet and gold. "You, human," she rasped. He swallowed hard. "You're hurt." Ship took a bad fall. She blinked, confusion crossing her features. "You speak the old tongue." Elias had no idea what she meant. "I speak English. You crash-landed near my settlement. I can help, but," his voice faltered as he glanced around at the alien technology, each panel pulsing with unreadable symbols. "I'm no star engineer." Her gaze sharpened, as if studying him through layers of reality. "You repair things. I felt it. He frowned. Felt it? She didn't answer. Instead, she slumped forward, unconscious. Elias stood there, torn between fear and compassion. The air around her vibrated faintly, the ship's systems flickering with life as if reacting to her heartbeat. Whatever she was still alive, and dying fast. Against every rational thought, he ran back through the dunes, loaded his hovercart with tools, and returned before dawn. By the time the first sun rose, Elias had patched the breach with welded scrap and coolant lines from an old rover. It wasn't elegant, but the strange hum inside the ship began to stabilize. He found himself whispering to it as he worked, like he used to talk to his old machines, as if kindness could keep circuits from burning out. When he paused to wipe his face, he realized the alien was watching him again, her golden eyes faintly open. "You mend without knowledge," she said weakly. "You repair with instinct." Elias shrugged, uncertain whether she was complimenting or accusing him. "Guess that's just how humans survive. We patch things until they hold together." Her lips curved slightly, almost a smile. "Then perhaps, you can patch a princess's warship." He blinked. "A what?" But before he could ask, the ground trembled again, not from the ship this time, but from something far above. When he looked up, the dawn sky flickered with distant movement. Tiny glimmers, multiplying. Elias didn't yet know it, but the stars had begun to move toward him. Morning came thin and pale over the dunes. The desert's silence was deceptive, beneath it, machines whispered. Elias stood outside the wreck, wiping the soot from his hands, watching plumes of faint vapor curl from the ship's fractured hull. It was a miracle it hadn't exploded outright. The air still smelled faintly ionized, like the aftermath of lightning. Somewhere deep inside that colossal machine, the alien, Karen, she'd called herself before fainting again, slept under the hum of systems that refused to die. Lyra peeked out from behind the ridge, eyes wide with both fear and curiosity. She'd followed him despite his warning. "Dad, is it dangerous?" "Probably," Elias said, not looking at her. "Which is why you're supposed to be at home." She stepped closer anyway, squinting at the gleaming surface. "It's beautiful. Like glass and metal had a baby." Elias couldn't argue. He touched the hull. It thrummed faintly beneath his fingertips, as if aware of him. Every few seconds, symbols rippled across the metal, patterns that looked like liquid circuitry. The ship seemed half alive, half conscious. He felt foolish talking to it, but somehow, it responded better when he did. He carried his tools inside. The interior was vast, cathedral-like, lined with fractured conduits and alien text glowing along the walls. The air shimmered faintly, heavy with a static field that made his skin prickle. In the center of the main chamber, Karen rested on a slab of crystalline alloy that pulsed softly, syncing with her heartbeat. He had spent years fixing human machines, but this was a symphony of design and mystery. There were no bolts, no visible circuits, only layers of material that responded to sound and thought. When he placed his palm against one cracked panel, it flickered and whispered in a tone like breathing. He wondered if the ship was communicating, if it was judging him. He worked through the day, using scavenged power cells and melted scrap to stabilize the ruptured energy conduits. It shouldn't have worked. His welding torch was primitive compared to whatever this technology was. Yet somehow, every patch he made seemed to awaken the ship a little more, like his presence bridged a gap it didn't understand. When he stopped to rest, Karen stirred. Her eyes opened, brighter this time, their hue shifting between gold and violet. She studied him, her gaze unblinking. "You repaired the conduits." "Temporarily," he said. "They're running on about 10% efficiency, if that. You're lucky I still had a working generator core." She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "You understand nothing of Vel technology. Yet you mend it with precision no human should possess." He gave a tired chuckle. You'd be surprised what a human can do when he doesn't have the manual. Karen's lips curved faintly, though he couldn't tell if it was amusement or disbelief. You should not be able to interact with our neural alloy. It responds to thought resonance, not crude electricity. Well, Elias said, adjusting a wire, maybe I just think louder than most. For the first time, he saw something soften in her face. A pause, as if the idea unsettled her. You are unlike the others. Others? Your kind, she murmured. Your species abandoned the stars centuries ago. The Dominion catalogued Earth as a failed world. You should not be here at all. Elias frowned. Maybe your Dominion needs a better map. Her gaze drifted toward the ceiling, distant. Perhaps. For hours, they spoke in fragments, about the ship, about the strange energies that powered it, about the war that had driven her across the stars. She said little about herself, but the way her tone shifted when she mentioned home told him enough. She wasn't a soldier, not exactly. There was command in her voice, the weight of someone used to being obeyed. When he mentioned Lyra, Karen turned her head sharply. You have offspring? Yeah, Elias said, softening. 7 years old. Smart enough to argue, curious enough to drive me insane. Karen was silent for a long moment. Your species values its young above all. That is rare among the stars. He shrugged. It's all we've got that's worth protecting. Something in that answer lingered in the air. The ship seemed to hum lower, as if listening. Karen's gaze softened slightly. By evening, the power grid he'd rigged began to stabilize. The ship's interior lights pulsed with steady rhythm now, forming veins of soft luminescence through the corridors. Lyra, who had refused to stay away, wandered in quietly, her small boots echoing on the glassy floor. She looked up at Karen without fear. Are you a robot? Karen blinked. I am alive. You're really tall. Lyra grinned. You kinda look like a space knight. Karen tilted her head again, as if processing the phrase. A knight? Someone who helps people, Lyra explained proudly. My dad says knights fix things that are broken. Elias chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. That's not exactly what I said. But Karen didn't laugh. Instead, she whispered something under her breath in a language that made the ship vibrate softly. When Elias looked at her questioningly, she said, Your child sees clearly. That night, as the twin moons rose, Elias sat outside the wreck, staring at the horizon. The stars above seemed wrong. Too many of them flickered faintly, moving in strange, coordinated arcs. He'd seen orbital patterns before, old satellites, maybe, but this was different. They were aligning. Inside, Karen's voice echoed through the open hatch. They will come for me. Elias turned. Who? My kind. Friends of yours? Her gaze caught the starlight, and for the first time, he saw fear in it. No. They are not my friends. The desert wind rose, carrying fine red dust across the plains. Elias felt something shift inside him, an intuition he couldn't name. Whatever he had rescued from the wreckage was no ordinary traveler. And whatever was coming from the sky, it wasn't rescue. He glanced once more at the ship's glowing frame, then toward the faint, glimmering movement above the horizon. The stars were drawing closer, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The nights after Karen's warning grew heavier. Elias could feel the change in the air, the silence wasn't just quiet anymore, it was listening. Even the desert creatures had vanished, as if the ground itself waited for something terrible to arrive. He spent his days tightening makeshift welds on the ship's fractured hull and his nights staring at the sky, watching the lights shift in unnatural patterns. Lyra still played near the dunes, unaware of the magnitude of what loomed above them, though even she sensed something different in her father's eyes. Karen was growing stronger. The wounds that had leaked strange light now shimmered with faint energy, and her voice no longer trembled. Yet there was an unease in her movements, like every breath she took was borrowed time. She observed Elias constantly, silently studying his every adjustment, every improvisation. Sometimes, when he made a repair that by all logic shouldn't work, the panels of her ship would glow faintly, almost approvingly. It unnerved him more than it comforted. "Your machines," she said one afternoon, her tone caught between awe and disbelief, "obey thought in their own way, do they not?" He looked up from a mess of cables. "You mean the ones I build from junk? They barely obey physics." "And yet they listen," she insisted, stepping closer, her presence radiating quiet gravity. "You do not fix them as engineers do. You speak to them." Elias snorted softly. "Guess I've been talking to broken things my whole life." Karen's gaze softened. "Perhaps that is why they answer." He didn't know what to make of that. But there was something about her voice, its calm certainty, that made him want to believe her. That night, the ship's sensors reawakened. Karen moved through the corridors with new precision, her hand brushing against the crystalline walls, leaving trails of light. Symbols blossomed around her touch, forming complex holographic constellations that hovered in the air like living star maps. Elias followed her, his pulse quickening at the sight. "What are those?" he asked. "Signatures," she murmured. "Transmissions of Dominion fleets. They search for my resonance beacon." "Your what?" "My genetic frequency," she explained, her tone darkening. "Every member of the royal line carries it. The fleets have already triangulated this sector." Elias frowned. "Royal line?" She hesitated, the silence stretching too long. Then she turned, her eyes glowing faintly. "I am Karen of Vel. High Daughter of the Dominion. Princess of the Outer Rings." The words hung between them like gravity itself. Elias exhaled slowly, wiping his hands on his work cloth. "A princess. Sure. And I'm the king of scrap metal." Her gaze didn't waver. "Your disbelief changes nothing. My fall from the stars was not by accident. I was betrayed." He wanted to laugh, but the conviction in her voice silenced him. Karen's expression was steel. "My ship was targeted by the Grand Council. They feared what I intended to do. And that was? To end the war." The ship hummed around them, as though echoing her words. Elias looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time noticed how exhaustion framed her regal bearing, how pain and pride lived side by side in her. She was no soldier, she was someone running from something far larger than herself. Lyra appeared at the entrance of the corridor, holding her small lantern. "Dad? Are we leaving soon? The wind sounds weird tonight." Elias opened his mouth to answer, but Karen spoke first. "The wind you hear is not the planet. It is their arrival." They stepped outside, and the horizon confirmed her words. The sky wasn't dark anymore, it was fractured. Tiny specks of light moved in formation, descending slowly, deliberately. Elias felt the ground vibrate, faint but growing stronger. The fleet had arrived. Karen's ship responded instinctively. Panels aligned. Energy channels roared to life, emitting waves of ionized mist. She moved to the control nexus, placing both hands against the wall. "I can shield us for a time," she said. "But I cannot run. The ship's warp core is fractured." Elias's mind raced. "If I could find a substitute for your containment seals, something that can redirect the flow, maybe I can give you enough power to leave." She looked at him, startled. "You cannot. Your materials are primitive." "Maybe," he said, his voice firm, "but I've made worse things fly." Without waiting, he sprinted back toward his shed, grabbing coils of graphene filament and an old energy cell from a decommissioned mining drone. Karen watched him work with unblinking intensity as he welded and wired with desperation, sealing fractures with what little conductivity Earth's junkyard metals could offer. Sparks lit the corridor in flares of blue. The fleet was almost upon them. Through the open hatch, Elias could see their silhouettes now, sleek ships that blotted out the stars. A low hum filled the air, like the sound of reality bending. Lyra clung to his leg. "Dad, are they going to hurt us?" He looked down, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Not if I can help it." Karen placed her hand on his shoulder. "You do not understand what you face. These are not soldiers. They are executioners. They come to erase me from existence. Then we'd better make them work for it." He reattached the last filament. The ship's energy field surged, casting the desert in brilliant light. The hull plates realigned with a groan, the power stabilizing to 70% capacity. "Enough," Karen said, "to lift, but not to flee the system." Her gaze met his. "You have done what even my engineers could not." Elias shrugged, breathless. "Guess they never tried using scrap from a refrigerator unit." Before she could reply, the first beam of light struck the sand a kilometer away, exploding in a geyser of molten glass. Lyra screamed. Karen turned toward the sky, her armor unfolding like living steel. "I will protect your child," she said. "But know this, Elias Morgan. Your world is now known to the Dominion." He didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the descending ships, thousands of them, glinting like knives. Karen stepped forward, her voice resonating through the ship and the sand itself. "They come for a fugitive. They will find a mother's mercy instead." The desert roared with light. The sky cracked open. And the human who had only wanted to fix a broken ship found himself standing at the heart of a war he didn't understand, one that would decide not just the fate of an empire, but the measure of what it meant to be human. The desert burned with the light of falling fire. The Dominion fleet descended like a curtain of stars collapsing, their formation so precise it seemed choreographed by some divine machine. The sky turned the color of molten copper, and each ship left behind a tail of plasma that scarred the horizon. Elias stood at the mouth of the wreck, the heat washing over him in waves. His patched circuits hummed, straining under the weight of energy no human material was ever meant to hold. Karen stood before the open hatch, armor blooming from her body like liquid metal, each plate sliding into place with the sound of a storm. The faint blue glow beneath her skin pulsed in rhythm with the ship's systems. She no longer looked like the wounded being he'd found among the sand, she looked like a force that had once commanded galaxies. Yet there was sorrow in her movements, as though every step toward battle cost her something she could never reclaim. "They will not negotiate," she said quietly, her voice layered, almost harmonic. "Their orders are to retrieve the body, alive or dead." Elias tightened his grip on the pulse rifle he'd resurrected from a pre-war crate. "Then let's make sure it's the first one." Her eyes flicked toward him, and something like amusement crossed her expression. "You are reckless for a creature so fragile. Been called worse." Lyra stood in the doorway behind him, clutching her mother's old pendant, the one she never took off. She looked between them, her face pale but resolute. "Dad, if they're looking for her, does that mean they'll hurt you too?" Elias knelt, resting a hand on her shoulder. "They'll have to go through both of us first." Karen turned sharply. "No. The child stays within the ship. The core field will protect her from atmospheric dissonance." Lyra opened her mouth to protest, but Karen's tone softened, like a whisper through glass. "Do not fear, small one. I owe your father more than you know." Then the first blast struck. The sand erupted into vapor, the ground fracturing under the pressure wave. Karen raised her hand, and a barrier of light shimmered into existence, a dome of energy that rippled like water. The beam broke across it, scattering in 1,000 directions. The air smelled of ozone and molten glass. Elias ducked behind a piece of hull, shielding Lyra. Through the heat haze, figures descended, metal-clad soldiers, towering like statues, their armor black and featureless. Their weapons glowed with lines of amber light, and their movements were mechanical, synchronized. Karen stepped out to meet them. The ground trembled with each pulse of her power. Her voice, amplified by the ship's resonance field, carried across the battlefield. This world is under my protection. Withdraw your fleet. The lead soldier spoke in a voice like broken machinery. By decree of the Grand Council, you are to be neutralized, High Daughter. Surrender your genetic seal. Karen's reply was quiet, but it carried the weight of thunder. If you seek my blood, you will drown in it. The soldiers opened fire. Elias watched as beams of pure energy cut through the air, striking Karen's barrier in rapid bursts. She moved like light incarnate, deflecting and redirecting each pulse, her armor channeling the impacts into arcs of plasma that scorched the sand. When one of the soldiers broke through the line, she struck with a burst of kinetic force that shattered its chest plate and sent it spinning into the dunes. He'd never seen anything like it. Her movements were neither human nor mechanical, something in between, precise yet graceful. But even with her power, the sheer number of attackers began to press her back. Elias darted into the ship, activating the generator sequence he'd patched together. The hum rose to a deep vibration, rattling his bones. Lights along the corridor flared, and the defense grid, the one Karen said would never work without a Dominion core, sputtered to life in a cascade of white arcs. The ship responded to him. It knew him. Karen felt it too. The barrier around the ship expanded, stronger, resonating with Elias's heartbeat. She turned briefly, her gaze sharp and uncertain. You're linked to it. How? He shook his head, sweat beading on his brow. You tell me. The power surged. Lightning ran across the hull, lashing at the incoming soldiers. Their weapons flickered, sensors shorting out under interference. Karen used the opening, launching forward in a blur, dismantling the first line of attackers in a flurry of motion that left the air quivering. Lyra watched through the viewport, wide-eyed, as her father and the alien fought side by side. In that chaos, the desert became a symphony of light and fury, technology and instinct colliding. Then, through the storm of energy, a larger ship appeared, its shape cutting through the clouds like a blade. Karen froze for a heartbeat, recognition flashing in her eyes. That is the Council's flagship. Elias followed her gaze. The vessel dwarfed everything else, radiating a gravitational field that distorted the sand beneath it. It descended slowly, deliberately, as though savoring the moment. From its underbelly, a voice echoed across every channel, translated even into human frequencies. Princess Karen of Vel. You were to bring unity. Instead, you bring rebellion. For the good of the Dominion, your reign ends here. Karen stood tall, the wind tearing at her armor, light radiating from the fractures that marked her fall. Then let the Dominion witness how peace begins, with a single act of defiance. Elias's systems began to overload. Alarms screamed in alien tones. The hull shuddered, straining against the power it was never meant to contain. He could see the core's readings spike, the barrier trembling at its limit. Karen turned to him. You must shut it down. If I do, we lose the shield, he shouted. If you don't, it will destroy you. He hesitated, then met her gaze. Then you'd better make this count. With a sound like the tearing of space, Karen unleashed everything. A wave of energy erupted from her armor, channeled through the ship's field and amplified by the human technology she'd once dismissed. The explosion didn't destroy the incoming fleet, it rewrote it. Ships lost their coherence, folding in on themselves as if reality forgot how to hold them together. When the light faded, silence fell. The flagship still hovered above, wounded but intact. Elias collapsed beside the console, smoke rising from the circuits. Karen knelt beside him, her breathing shallow, her glow dimming. You shouldn't have done that, he whispered. Her gaze softened, a faint smile ghosting her lips. And let your species fight this alone. No. You repaired more than a ship, Elias. You reminded me what it means to fight for something worth saving. Above them, the flagship turned slowly, retreating into the stratosphere. It wasn't over, but for now, the world still stood. And somewhere deep within the alien wreck, the ship began to whisper in a voice neither of them could quite understand, a blend of human thought and alien code, speaking of possibilities neither world had ever imagined. The desert was quiet again, but it was not the same silence. The air shimmered faintly, saturated with radiation residue and the scent of scorched ozone. Where moments before there had been a battle that could have torn the planet apart, now only drifting motes of silver light remained, fragments of ships, particles of rewritten metal and energy fading into the wind. Elias stood in the ruins of the workshop he had once called home, his pulse still echoing the rhythm of the ship's dying hum. The generator was gone, burned through, the power conduits melted into strange glass-like spirals that still vibrated softly under his boots. Karen sat at the edge of the crater her explosion had carved, motionless, her armor fractured and dim. Her gaze was turned upward, toward the bleeding dawn. Lyra slept inside the ship, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of oil and sand. Elias walked toward Karen slowly, his limbs trembling, part exhaustion, part disbelief that they were still alive. "Are they gone?" he asked, voice rough. "Most," she answered without turning. "The Council's flagship has retreated beyond orbit. But the signal of my survival will already have reached the Dominion. Others will come." He crouched beside her, squinting at the faint light bleeding from the cracks in her armor. "You're hurt again." She shook her head. "I cannot be repaired by your means this time." He hesitated. "You said that before. This is different. The energy I unleashed, it was forbidden. The Vel called it the memory pulse. It burns the mind as it saves the body." Elias leaned back, rubbing his hands together. "So you saved us by frying your own circuits?" Her lips curved faintly. "Something like that." He looked toward the horizon. The sand was glass in places, molten into patterns that almost looked deliberate, rings and spirals like writing only the wind could read. "You knew what would happen." "Yes," she said quietly. "And I did it anyway." They sat in silence. The twin suns began to rise, painting the broken ship in amber light. Elias studied her profile. For the first time, she looked small, the edges of her strength blurring into something almost human. "So what now? You hide? Run? Start another war?" She turned to him then, her eyes dimmed to a soft gold. "No. I send a message. To the people trying to kill you." "To everyone," she said, standing slowly, her body stiff but steady. "The Dominion believes control is peace. They believe obedience is life. But your world, your child, showed me something else." She walked back into the ship, and he followed. The core room still glowed faintly, flickers of life where power had once raged uncontrollably. Karen moved to the main console, her fingers brushing against the crystal surface. "This vessel carries an echo transmitter. I can amplify it through your planet's magnetic field. It will reach the nearest systems within a day." Elias frowned. "What are you going to tell them?" "The truth. That the Dominion's strength is hollow. That the smallest act of compassion from a forgotten human world changed their empire." "That sounds like suicide." "Perhaps. Or salvation." The ship hummed, recognizing her command. Symbols spiraled upward from the floor, projecting into the air like floating script. Elias didn't understand any of it, but he could feel the charge building, the same instinct that had guided his repairs. It felt alive. Lyra stirred in the corner, rubbing her eyes. "Dad? What's happening?" "Something big," he said softly. Karen turned toward the child, her expression unreadable. "Your people will be remembered, Lyra of Earth. You have changed the stars without leaving your sky." Lyra blinked at her, not fully understanding, then offered a shy smile. "You talk weird." Karen's eyes softened, and she almost laughed. "So I have been told." The signal began to build. Energy surged through the ship, light weaving around Karen's body in tendrils of blue and silver. Elias felt the floor vibrate beneath him, the hum of something vast and ancient waking once more. Karen lifted her hands, and her voice, clear, resonant, echoing through frequencies far beyond human hearing, filled the chamber. "Citizens of the Dominion," she said. "I speak as one who has seen our empire from above and below. I speak not as a ruler, but as a witness. I found a world abandoned by your maps, inhabited by a people you called extinct. They live without conquest. They survive without control. One of them, a man of rust and patience, repaired what your science could not. He taught me the truth of creation, that order without compassion is just another form of death." Her words reverberated through the hull, vibrating through Elias's bones. The light grew brighter, expanding beyond the ship, rising into the atmosphere. From orbit, the pulse would look like a bloom of white spreading across the desert, a beacon cutting through the void. "Let this message reach those who still dream of peace," Karen continued. "The Dominion's age of dominion ends today. Let it end not with blood, but with choice." Elias watched her, realizing he was witnessing not rebellion, but something older, a transformation. Karen's glow intensified, and for a moment he feared she was burning away completely. "Karen," he shouted over the hum, "you're going to kill yourself." She turned to him, her face calm. "Perhaps. But my death will buy your world a future." The pulse reached its peak. The sound vanished, replaced by a silence so vast it seemed to stretch across galaxies. Then, gently, the light faded. Karen stood motionless for a long time before collapsing. Elias caught her before she hit the floor, her weight heavier than it should have been. Her eyes flickered faintly. "It is done," she whispered. He held her as her breathing slowed, the warmth of her skin cooling beneath his hands. "You can rest now," he said softly. "You've done enough." Outside, the sky shimmered. The stars above seemed to rearrange themselves, forming unfamiliar constellations. Somewhere far beyond sight, the Dominion fleets hesitated, receiving a message they did not know how to answer. In the desert below, a human father sat with an alien princess in his arms, while his daughter watched the horizon, where the sky no longer looked the same. The days that followed felt slower, quieter, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The storm that had once threatened to erase them all was gone, replaced by a strange calm that neither Elias nor Lyra could explain. The desert was still scarred, craters, fused sand, metallic ash scattered like snow, but the air no longer hummed with danger. Even the stars at night seemed different, brighter somehow, as if the heavens had leaned closer to listen to what had happened there. Karen remained in the ship, her body suspended in a stasis cocoon formed from the last reserves of its energy. The medical system called it quantum dormancy, but Elias called it sleep. Every few hours he checked the monitors, tracing the soft pulse of light that still flickered beneath her armor. The machine told him she was alive, barely, but alive. Lyra would sit near her sometimes, whispering stories about school, or the goats they used to keep before the drought, or how the stars didn't scare her anymore. The child's voice filled the hollow ship like sunlight finding its way through cracked windows. Elias couldn't bring himself to stop her. It made the silence bearable. One evening, while repairing what was left of the workshop's roof, Elias noticed a flicker in the sky, a thin silver streak descending from orbit. His stomach tightened. "Lyra," he called, running inside. "Get in the ship, now." But before he could reach the console, the ship's sensors came alive on their own. The holographic display lit the chamber in blue, showing not an approaching fleet but a single vessel, small, sleek, unarmed. It landed quietly a few hundred meters away, stirring up a spiral of dust. The hatch opened, and a tall figure stepped out. Elias froze. The newcomer's armor was different from Karen's, simpler, ceremonial, but the same faint sigil glowed on their chest. When they spoke, their voice carried an echo of hers. Human engineer Elias Wren. He hesitated. Who's asking? The figure bowed slightly. I am Envoy Tereth, of the Dominion's Neutral Council. I came because of the message. Elias frowned. You heard it? The entire quadrant heard it, Tereth said softly. It spread faster than any command transmission we've ever known. You have no idea what she did. He glanced toward the cocoon. I think I do. Teretha's gaze followed his. She is alive. Barely. The envoy stepped closer, eyes softening. Then the prophecy was true. The princess of the Vel would fall among the forgotten worlds and find salvation not through conquest, but through compassion. Elias sighed. I don't care about prophecies. I just want her to wake up. She will, Tereth said, almost smiling. But when she does, everything will have changed. The Dominion is already fracturing. Worlds once afraid to speak are calling for reform. The fleets are standing down. Your world, this little desert planet, has become the symbol of something greater than empires. He didn't know how to respond. He had never cared for symbols or empires. He just wanted to keep his daughter safe and fix broken things. Yet now, it seemed, the galaxy had decided to make him part of its story. Tereth produced a small crystalline device and handed it to him. This contains a record of her transmission and a charter from the new council forming in her name. When she wakes, she will be offered leadership, but of a different kind. A union built not on rule, but cooperation. Her wish. Elias accepted it, the weight of it strange in his hands. And what about us? You will be remembered, Tereth said simply. The man who mended the fallen star. That night, when the envoy departed, the sky shimmered again with the faint trails of departing ships. Elias stood outside for a long while, watching the dust swirl around his boots. Lyra ran up beside him, clutching his arm. Is she going to be okay? She will, he said softly. She just needs time. Weeks passed. The ship began to heal itself, reshaping around the desert like something growing rather than being built. The strange, glassy soil beneath it started to bloom with tiny silver flowers, seeds carried, perhaps, from another world. Elias didn't understand it, but he stopped trying to. Not everything needed fixing. Some things just needed space to become what they were meant to be. One dawn, as the first light crawled across the horizon, the ship's hum changed. A low resonance filled the air, and the cocoon cracked open with a sigh. Karen's eyes fluttered open, faintly luminous, her voice a whisper of static and breath. Elias. He was at her side in seconds. Welcome back. She looked around, confusion softening into recognition. The signal reached them. It did more than that, he said. You changed everything. She smiled weakly. Then it was worth it. Lyra appeared beside him, grinning. You were asleep forever. Karen reached out, brushing a strand of hair from the child's forehead. Dreams take time. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering silver petals into the air. The stars above pulsed faintly, their constellations reshaped by whatever invisible current her message had set in motion. The Dominion would rebuild, but differently this time, with voices like hers guiding it toward something gentler. Elias helped her outside. Together they stood beneath the strange, shimmering sky. What will you do now? He asked. Karen's gaze followed the wind. Stay. For a while. There is more to learn from you and your daughter than from 1,000 thrones. He nodded, smiling faintly. You'll have to get used to hard work and broken tools. I've learned from the best, she said, and for the first time, her laughter sounded human. The suns rose higher, burning gold across the dunes. The ship, the desert, the broken earth, all seemed to hum with the same quiet rhythm, as if the universe itself was exhaling after a long-held breath. And in that silence, amid dust and light, a human father, his daughter, and a once-feared alien princess began something new. Not an empire, not a legend, but a life.